So yeah, like Fiona said, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about this legacy code battle, it feels like at times. So I've worked at a couple of different companies. Some of them are really big, some of them are really small, and they all seem to have the same problem with their CSS. It spirals out of control sometimes overnight. And so I just wanted to take a look at what's going on, why that's happening, and maybe try and figure out how we can clean it up. So I think it's pretty fair to say that no one sets out to write legacy code, but CSS is just inherently messy. So what is legacy code? What makes our code messy, I guess? So some say that it's any code as soon as it's released, which I guess is valid, but I'd like to think that we can do a little bit better than that, and that the things we're writing last more than a couple days. So the second definition I came across was code you'd rather rewrite than work with, and I completely relate to this almost on a daily basis. You open up a file, you look at it, and you're like, oh my god, what was this person thinking? I just want to rewrite it, it would be so much easier. But most of the time, if you take a step back and you look at what they actually did, you can start to see, okay, this is how they approached the problem. It's probably not that bad. It's just not what you wrote. So it takes a little bit of learning to get used to it. And then I guess a third definition is basically code that's maintained by someone other than the original author. And again, I'd like to think the minute you leave a company doesn't mean that all the code you wrote is now no good and they have to start over. So then I came across a book by Michael Feathers, and he basically wrote an entire book on effectively dealing with legacy code. And he says that to him, legacy code is simply code without tests. And that made a lot of sense to me, because the biggest problem with our code most of the time is that we're afraid to change it because we don't know what's going to happen. So if we had some tests in place, then at least we get some feedback on what we were doing. Except that it's CSS, and it's really hard to test it at this point. So while an awesome definition didn't totally apply to at least what I do during the day. So I kind of put together some thoughts on what my own definition would be, which is basically that it's not readily understandable. It's typically missing some kind of clear architecture, and you feel like you have to relearn it anytime you go in there to update it. So basically it's just usually a lot of code that you just can't wrap your head around. So how did this happen? Where does it come from? I think it's fair to say that front end has undergone some massive changes. I think we probably wake up to a new JavaScript framework every day. But beside that, a few years ago we weren't even using preprocessors, but now we have SAS. A couple of years ago, we were priding ourselves on building entire websites without using classes or IDs. Yes, everything was base element selectors and nested. And now we look at that code and think, okay, why? And we also have CSS, BEM, SMAX, frameworks, new tooling, all of this great stuff that, I think we've been on this journey. The decisions we made a few years ago, they weren't bad decisions. They were probably really good decisions for the time. But today we have to live with those decisions. So that's, contributing to this legacy code. And then there's the other side of it. So beyond the tech, there's also the company you work for and the business and the culture behind that. So for me, I work in a startup. It's a great experience, but their business priorities change all the time. And that completely affects how you write code. Usually they change right in the middle of what you're working on. It just makes it a little harder to write things that are reusable, but we deal. And what kind of comes along with that is that we need to start to understand the compromises that we're making and realize that it's tech debt. At the end of the day, there's no way around it. We have to make the compromises. We have to get things out in front of our customers, and ultimately that's how we're getting paid. But we need to understand what that means, and also understand that as much as we say, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna have time to go back to that next week, probably not. And then the last one's a big one for me. A lot of people think that writing CSS is really easy. And sure, it's easy to write it, but it's not easy to write it well. And I think most of the people in this room understand that really well. So, I think a lot of times the team's really busy, you're pushing to get something out, and there's always that person in the room that raises their hand and they're like, I'll help you write the CSS, I know how to do it. And that's great, it's awesome. It's awesome when your team steps up and they want to help you, but it's also, it contributes to tech debt. It contributes to this legacy code because you're probably gonna have to refactor that code. So, it's great that they want to help, but again, understand that in some ways is one of these compromises that leads to more legacy code. So what's the big deal? Why does it matter? So it sucks for your customers, first of all. They typically end up with a poor, inconsistent user experience. A lot more bugs make it to production when you've got these big code bases that you're not really sure what's going on. Typically page performance suffers. So it hurts your customers. And it sucks for you as a developer. Affects you every single day because it's frustrating. It slows you down and it takes you way longer to do stuff. You break things more often, and it's really hard to tell what you're gonna break. You go in there, you test things, you feel really good about it, and you push it to production, and inevitably someone from the business walks over and says, hey, did you know that this button doesn't work anymore? Or did you mean for that to be 17 pixels taller than it was yesterday? And the answer is usually no, but it happens. And so all of those things end up, they suck for the business as a whole, because that massive amount of legacy code ends up eventually affecting your business strategy. It makes it really hard to get new features in front of customers, and it also affects the morale on your team. So, I think all of us, we talk, we look around, we see what other companies are doing, and when you have a lot of legacy code, it can affect your hiring, and it affects your ability to retain good people. So what does that mean? It means we need to start to clean this up, but how do we go about doing that? So I think it's really important to realize that there is no magic solution. I wish I could stand up here and tell you this is the tool that's going to fix it for you, and it's going to fix it for you tomorrow. But that's just not a promise I can make. Every code base is different. It's really important to take a step back and understand how your code base got to the way that it is. And then I think that the first solution that all of us come to is let's just rewrite it. Let's just start over. But and that might be true for some code bases. That might be the only option, but you need to go about it in a really organized manner. And you need to understand what the business, their expectations on you as a team are going to be when you try to do that in order for it to be successful. So I think the first thing to really question is, can you honestly rewrite that entire code base and at the same time continue to roll out new features? I know for us, we're trying to refactor some of the things that we've been doing, but at the same time, the business, we're growing really fast. So we have to put new things in front of customers. So it means we have to balance the time we spend refactoring and the time we spend writing new things. So what you need to do, I think, in that case is you really need to build your case to the business and explain to them some of the things I talked about earlier, how eventually this affects their business strategy. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You can do that by gathering insights, take a look at your metrics, start to measure, start to keep track of how many bugs are making it into production, how often are you having to do hot fixes, things like that. And then, so putting sort of the fact that you need to rewrite this code in some way, whether you stop everything and rewrite it all for the next 6 months, or you try to refactor as you go along, The other side of this problem is that you need to understand how it happens so you can stop it from continuing to happen with the new code that you're writing. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things you can do to try and write better code today. And the first thing is you need to invest in yourself and in your team. That can happen in a couple of different ways, but it mostly happens by training and by making sure that you're communicating with each other all the time. The second thing is that you really need to take the time to reacquaint yourself with the basics. Like I said, we've got new tools, new frameworks, CSS, there's new things coming out all the time. And it's really exciting and it's really tempting to just go play with all of this new stuff. But sometimes it's really important to take a step back and think about, how do I actually structure this document to be more semantic? A lot of times I look at some of my code and think, wow, if we had just gone back to basics and really simplified this, we wouldn't be in the position we're in today. But we tend to over-engineer things. I think it's just in our nature as developers. We get excited and we want to just do it all at once. And one of the major parts of that is if you're using a framework, learn it like inside and out. Get in there and understand everything that framework is giving you. It doesn't matter if it's Bootstrap or Foundation or whatever, they're full of code. And if you don't use it, it's code that's sitting in your code base contributing to that bloat, but it's just getting in your way. So just make sure that you spend the time to really get to know your tools. The third thing is, as a team, you really need to talk about coding standards and guidelines. Hugely important. Doesn't matter if you're a team of 2 or a team of 10 or a team of 100, you need to get on the same page about these things. And I'm not talking about whether you're using 2 spaces or 4. I'm talking about how much you're nesting your CSS, how you're using extends, how you're commenting, and look to others. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great people out there in the industry who have open source and blogged about their coding standards and their guidelines. So check out what people like Harry Roberts have to say. Check out what Nicholas Gallagher has to say. Sid CSS Today just retweeted, I forget his name right now, but someone else's guidelines. So grab things from other places and really start to put together some guidelines that you as a team all agree on. It's going to help you. And lastly, write the best code you can today. I know it's really tempting to just slap an important tag on at the end of the file and just go home and be like, it's going to work. But that's not going to solve it. You really need to refactor as you go. And it's also just going to make you better as a developer. So, thank you.